Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you my thoughts on George Floyd's death and the Derek Chauvin trial. First and foremost, I want to tell you that I'm going to give you two different viewpoints. Two viewpoints that ordinarily would seem to contradict one another in this day and age, but they really don't contradict one another. I do believe that George Floyd was murdered. I believe that Eric Garner was murdered in 2014 in New York City. I think that George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I know that police brutality affects African Americans and black citizens more so than other ethnicities. However, look up Daniel Shaver. He was gunned down just because he walked out of it. Well, the only thing he did was walk out of his motel or hotel room. You can look, if you say, oh my God, you support law enforcement, and look at what happened to Daniel Shaver. If you want to say it doesn't happen to white people or doesn't happen to other people of other ethnicities or backgrounds or races, go look at what happened to Daniel Shaver. It's also one of the most atrocious, evil things you've ever seen in your life, and he was murdered as well. But I believe that George Floyd was murdered, and I still support law enforcement. I'm a member of the 1199 Foundation that supports families of the California Highway Patrol, fallen CHP officers, supports their families, and does other really wonderful things for the CHP. The California Highway Patrol does just a tremendous amount of work, and they do great things every day in California. I have a plaque in my different quote-unquote studio that you see sometimes, but I want to kind of give people these two viewpoints because they're compatible, they're not contradictory, and I think more people should adopt. And I think that more people should at least be open to viewing the world in the way that I view the world. Not saying that I'm 100% right or morally superior, because that's not how I roll. That's not how I do things. I don't like to condemn and judge. I'll just tell you what I think about this topic in this video. You cannot put your knee or your boot or put pressure on someone's neck, or you can't get them in a chokehold, and if they say you can't continue the chokehold if they say I can't breathe. Eric Garner, we should have learned from Eric Garner in his murder in New York City in 2014. There's a political component of this that I think people are missing. We should have learned from Eric Garner in 2014, his death, his murder. He was the first person, or he was one of the first person perhaps that we heard the phrase, I can't breathe, and it was on video. And he died just like George Floyd died. But had we learned the lessons and learned what happened with Eric Garner in 2014, he should be alive today. Had we learned those lessons, the country wouldn't have experienced what took place with George Floyd. George Floyd would be alive today. The fact that he might have had narcotics, or that he had narcotics in his system, the fact that Eric Garner was perhaps overweight, in my view, these things, even though I support law enforcement, are irrelevant, because the person is still saying he can't breathe. So you just have to wait longer before he gets into the police vehicle. Or I understand that there's a rebuttal as well. If they just would have gotten into the police vehicle, they'd be alive today. That could be the case. If he just didn't have narcotics, he'd be alive today. Well, that could be the case. If he just wasn't overweight, he'd be alive today. Well, that could be the case. But the fact is, we know that these two black men, African-American men, stated they couldn't breathe. And still, the officers, wouldn't stop from either the chokehold or from pushing their neck or their head down. Police officers risk their lives every day. Is there, can you paint all of law enforcement as rotten and ruined because of these atrocities? What happened to Daniel Shaver? What happened to George Floyd? Daniel Shaver's white. I believe he was white. He was not African American or black. So, can you paint what happened to these individuals? Can you paint what happened to these citizens in a manner that condemns all law enforcement? No, you can't. And I don't think you should. I don't think you can, because if you switched places for the people who say that, police officers and cops and they're all this or that, go and switch places with them for 1 second. Deal with actual criminals. Deal with people. Like, your life is on the line every day. That's not, people roll their eyes at that, but it's true. It's true. You generally, if you're watching this video, no matter what race or ethnicity you are, you're going to live a normal life. You're not going to run into criminals. Most Americans don't run into criminals every day. And there are certain police departments where police officers run into criminals every week, sometimes every day for a certain period of time, definitely every month or every couple of months. And your life is at risk, okay? Democrats and media don't realize that you can implement any type of gun control legislation. Criminals don't care. It would be law-abiding citizens that abide by gun laws. And so you are at risk of being shot. You're at risk of being stabbed. You're at risk of never going back home to your family. So and the rebuttal is, well, that you should get trained to where you can deal with interactions in a respectful manner. Okay, fine, but I agree with that. But that usually happens. There are millions of interactions every year between police officers and citizens. There aren't what took place with Eric Garner and Derek Chauvin are atrocities that don't usually happen. They should never happen, but they don't usually happen. What usually takes place is a peaceful or positive or generally a normal interaction between a citizen and a police officer. And when you need, in many of these cases also, with Breonna Taylor, with George Floyd, it's a person of color calling the police. Not a white person calling the police, or it is a situation where there are, like, for example, with Breonna Taylor, the police officer was shot at by her boyfriend. So there was, she should be alive too. But again, there are so many factors, and what I'm trying to tell you is I'm not justifying any horrible tragedy. What I'm saying is there are many factors that unfortunately lead to these tragedies. Whatever happens with Derek Chauvin trial, I want to kind of tell the world my viewpoint. My viewpoint is that he might get off. He might be found not guilty because of the narcotics in Mr. Floyd's system, and because he was resisting arrest or not getting into the police vehicle. I don't think that's relevant. I don't think that's relevant because he did state endless times, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Even if that was a result of narcotics in his system, and if the defense is successful in trying to prove that it wasn't the knee on the neck, it was the narcotics, that's still irrelevant because you don't have him saying, I can't breathe, without the knee on the neck. He's still breathing with the narcotics in his system. So the fact that he was subdued in that manner, I believe, is the definition of a murder. His life was taken because of whatever circumstances you want to assign, or whatever circumstances you want to ascribe to the situation. the reality, the bottom line is that we can't, as a society, allow anyone to lose their life on video, especially while the person is saying, I can't breathe, I need to breathe. That is something that no law enforcement official, nobody can allow. So I do believe that, his life was taken, he was murdered. I don't believe it was anything other than that, because Chauvin was being told numerous times that if you don't stop what you're doing, he's not going to survive. He was telling that to Chauvin. So that being said, I want people to realize that we live in a country of 320 million Americans. If you reduce what took place with George Floyd and Eric Garner and Daniel Shaver as just police being bad, I think that you're missing the lessons that we should all learn as a society. I don't believe the $1 to $2 billion in property damage did anything to help anyone. How many black-owned businesses were destroyed? How many Latino and Asian-owned businesses were destroyed? I think that the protests primarily served the Democratic Party. I don't think that if you look at New York City with Eric Garner and Minneapolis, Minnesota with George Floyd, these are Democratic strongholds. How Democrats, and especially Amy Klobuchar, she didn't prosecute Chauvin in 2006. Amy Klobuchar under scrutiny for 2006 case involving officer charged in George Floyd's death, Ledyard King and Crystal Hayes. So those are the two journalists. So I think that Democrats get away with their responsibility, their role in this. They painted this as Trump's America. You have atrocities taking place in Biden's America, and Eric Garner lost his life in President Obama's America. Okay? But I think that you have a situation where it's politicized, and this is a situation where the state has too much power and authority, and the state and the federal government should ensure that you cannot block a person's airways when they're on the ground. We should have learned from Eric Garner. I think that's my long-winded attempt at explaining this. There were people of color, there were officers who were people of color in Minneapolis, Minnesota with George Floyd, a Democratic stronghold, and there were officers who were people of color in New York City in 2014 with Eric Garner, a Democratic stronghold. I can't, maybe Seattle, Portland, LA, New York, you can't find a more liberal city than either New York City or Minneapolis. I think, unfortunately, it's been politicized to where one political side benefits and the state gets away with its role in allowing this to take place or ignoring lessons of the past. We should never have gotten to this point. We should have learned from Eric Garner's murder in New York City. That being said, like I said in the beginning of this segment, I do support law enforcement because they risk their lives every day. And if you don't believe that, I don't know, go on a ride along, or if there's a program to see what officers do every day. It's not, you could say, well, I've had this bad interaction, I've had that bad interaction. Okay, fine, but you don't know how you'd be. You don't know the emotional state you'd be if you had to live the life of a police officer. So I do respect people who do risk their lives every day. Police officers risk their lives every single day. And just because you don't see the criminals that they have to deal with, they're there for you when you call them. I mean, oftentimes people who are the most critical of police officers will be the first, will call them in a split second if they need help. Anyway, that being said, I do believe George Floyd was murdered. I hope and pray that whatever happens with the trial, that more destruction doesn't take place, because that hasn't led to anything in terms of federal legislation. And simply pointing to, well, it led in Minneapolis, there was a law. There would have been a law anyway. You wouldn't have had to. You wouldn't have had to engage in $500 million in Minneapolis alone, or 200 to 500 million, something like that. There's $2 billion in property damage and 19 lives lost. You have 19 lives lost. You had a pregnant woman who was shot. It's just unbelievable. Like, it's unbelievable. Pregnant woman shot. Where was this? I'm trying to find this, okay. So, a black woman was shot. Man sentenced to 49 years for fatal shooting of pregnant woman near Floyd Memorial in Minneapolis. Like, how on earth? So, this woman was, this is one of the 19 people, maybe more than 19 people, according to Wikipedia, who lost their lives. And I don't know how this benefits that woman. This pregnant woman should be alive today. Zachary Robinson was sentenced on Friday for the shooting of the mother of his child, 27-year-old Lanisha Columbus, at 37th Street East and Elliott Avenue on July 5, 2020. Days after pleading guilty, judge sentenced a man to 49 years behind bars for the deadly shooting of a pregnant woman in South Minneapolis this summer near the George Floyd Memorial. At the time of the shooting, Columbus was 26 weeks pregnant, and the poor baby died from complications because the child was prematurely delivered. After she was shot, Columbus's child was prematurely delivered and rushed to the hospital. I'll put that link below. Witnesses say Columbus was in her vehicle arguing with Robinson when she started to drive north in Chicago. Robinson fired shots at the SUV and then shot a woman who confronted him. So this world is a complicated place where if evil was committed with George Floyd being murdered, and then you had so much evil coming out of that, instead of simply like, look, I don't know exactly how to convey my viewpoint, but I don't think anyone should use the murder of George Floyd for any political purpose or for any purpose other than trying to fix and better society. I don't think that $1 to $2 billion in property damage, 19 lives lost, and you could say, well, one rebuttal is, well, that has nothing to do directly with it. Well, it was right near the George Floyd Memorial, and so anyway, give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. It is the society that we live in needs to ignore media hysteria, because there was a tragedy with Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, but what was taking place, this pregnant woman should be alive, my God. And her baby should be alive. And she's a black woman. And media is completely... And it was use of firearms in a Democratic-run city with very strict gun laws. So there you go. It's kind of like reality doesn't gravitate towards media spin. Reality is a tough pill to swallow in many cases. Give me your thoughts below. Hit subscribe right now. Thank you so much.